Are you the type of person that feels as if you have to do things all at once? Like you take on a project or you're doing something new. Maybe you're trying to lose weight or get in shape and you just do everything all at once. You're like all in. And you get to a point where maybe you feel overwhelmed, stressed out, or burned out and your go to is to just want to do none of it. So you want to just quit. Maybe you are the type of person that when something new is coming about, you're great at sprinting, but then you lose your steam and you go into this all or nothing, black or white thinking. If you answer yes to this, there's a good possibility that you have some strong perfectionistic tendencies because that is a number one trait tendency for the perfectionist. In this week's episode, my guest, Rachel Brooks, the host of the Confident Woman podcast and author of Chasing Freedom, a journey to healing, fitness, and self love. We have a great conversation about what one can do. What's the antidote if this is your way of going through life? So I encourage you to tune into this week's episode. Rachel, as an author of Chasing Perfection, a journey to healing, fitness, and self love, as well as the host of the Confident Woman podcast, I would love to start by having you explain to me and the listeners, what is it that you mean when you say chasing perfection? Like one can draw an assumption or conclusion about it, but what does that mean to you? And tell us about how that maybe came about to write your book.
Yes. Thank you, first of all, for having me. This is such an honor to be here and talk about all the things that I actually talk about in my book. So it's fun to unpack this and have those real, raw, honest conversations and a deep dive into what it is really when we chase perfection. And I think for me, chasing perfection and the title of that book is the illusion, right? That there's something greater and perfect and it's just so, right? So it's this constant chase, this hustle, this strive, this push for the unattainable, the illusion that if my life was just so perfect, then finally I could have rest. Finally, it'll be worth it. Finally, I will be enough. And it's this what we put out. So our output is inherent on our input. So that's how we, I guess, pretend to achieve that. And it's this false illusion. So that's why the story behind the chasing perfection is really me taking off the mask and laying it down. And so I think when we unpack the book in today's conversation, and not to give too much away, but it really does come down to taking off those masks and taking down our guard and stripping everything off and just being seen. But that's one of the scariest things out there. What if they judge me, right? Those are all those fears that we're going to talk about too. So when you're seen, there's so much of a risk because you don't know what's on that other side, how people are going to perceive you. Are they going to accept or reject you? Are they going to love you and embrace you? So there's a lot of vulnerability and transparency, which I feel is when we dive further into today's conversation, will realize how those become your superpowers and are able to let go of that chase so that you can really embrace who you are today.
I love what you said because I can remember when I was a little girl, I would always pretend that I had magical powers. I pretended that I was either I Dream a Genie. I don't know if you remember that
Yep.
show, I Dream a Genie. And I could just blink my eyes or take my magic wand and I could just make everything perfect,
Mhm.
everything just so in my life. And the reason that I often wanted to do that is because a lot of my childhood wasn't perfect. There was a lot of turmoil. And because our brains are wired to move away from pain and toward pleasure, I would go into this fantasy place in my head that if I could just wave my wand and make everything perfect, then I could just breathe. Then
Mhm.
I could just relax.
Mhm.
Then my life would be enough and I would be enough. But I also love what you're saying too is that because we are often afraid to be our true selves, who we came in this world to be, that we start to put on the mask. We start to wear the mask of perfection and we start to portray this illusion that we have it all together. We have our shit together, that we're uber competent, over functioning, overachieving, all to avoid that rejection, all to avoid that abandonment. And I know that you mentioned that you're a recovering perfectionist. So, do you have what is your story in terms of what it was like for you, why you were wearing that perfection mask, and then how you started to lay it down, as you said?
Yeah, so I think for me, it goes back to childhood again, and a lot of the things that we carry through our adult life are things that we haven't addressed or unpacked from our childhood. And I found myself at this rock bottom several years back, and I just had to really ask myself, like, how did I get here? This is not the life that I worked my butt off for, the life that I had imagined. And when the expectation doesn't meet the outcome, there's a big disconnect, and you start to question not just about the processes or the stories or the narratives that got you there, but you start questioning yourself. Who am I? How would I have gotten here if I was doing everything was doing everything so perfectly? Why am I at rock bottom? And it wasn't about trying to outthink my way to the top to climb back out, but it was about this time trying something different, and I had to turn inward and start asking myself those questions. Who am I? What's holding me back? Why? Like, why am I here? Not just here at the rock bottom of the pit. Why am I here on this earth? Like, this can't be my story. And so there was a lot of that inward reflection. And the one thing that I think that was different prior to me landing at the bottom was personal accountability and personal responsibility. So I had to take inventory of all that had happened that led me there. And it goes back to that childhood. So with childhood, there's a lot of, for me, I experienced a lot of shame, a lot of growing up differently. I was the only girl in my family, only girl, like even in my cousins and extended family. So I was just felt like an outsider. Nobody really knew what to do with a girl. How do I act girly? How do I do girly things? Do I have playmates? Do I have friends? Like it was just, I always felt like an outsider and misunderstood and disconnected as well. So for me, I was just very observant. I was that quiet person that would observe and would look at others and say, if I can make them laugh, then I'll be accepted. Or if I could clean up after somebody, I could be helpful. Or if I could do this, then that. It was always an if, then that. And that turned into years and years of people pleasing. And the irony is that when I sat down to write my book, which I begrudgingly resisted and said, I am not writing a book, like you got the wrong person. This is not where I'm at. And this is God call somebody else, like wrong person. And but as I was sitting down to write this book, I didn't realize even the terms of a perfectionist, a people pleaser. I'd seen it. Oh, that's for somebody else. It wasn't a label or a title I took on until I was actually unpacking my life and I realized, ooh, that's me. I'm doing just that. I had done just that. So, how can I do something different that doesn't ruffle the feathers too much where I'm outcasted, but also how can I reclaim some of that power? And a lot of this, again, comes well after the transformation in my life, because obviously when you're at rock bottom, you don't think about these things. Your story is hindsight, your awareness is hindsight. You're like, "Oh, okay." And so I had to take all these pieces and sew them together and saw the through line that traced all the way back to my childhood and how I had been carrying these labels and these identities and these roles with me throughout decades of my life. And that was where the real growth and transformation had happened in my life, but then the book came about a couple years afterwards.
Did you have a pivotal or defining moment that was your awakening, or was it a gradual unfolding?
No, it was a gradual unfolding until life just uprooted and some catastrophic, unexpected loss of my brother. So he was my middle brother, and so when I'd lost him, I just hit bottom because I was just like, the awareness of the fragility of life, and could this really be my life? Why am I living like this? And to know that his passing, there's gotta be something good that comes out of it. I can't just be this individual that whose brother had passed. The poor girl that took pity and shame and patronized and all the things that I didn't want negative attention or connotation to me. And so that allowed me now to push further because I wanted to be somebody who could shine and not look dim and dark. And that was the reality of what I was feeling internally. Because when his passing, my whole world went from basically twilight to pitch black. It was just gone. He was the spark in my life, and I found so much of my identity in him because he and I grew up together. We're just shy of 24 months apart. Now, he passed later on in life, but because we had our lives were so interconnected that I didn't know who I was without him, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally, it does.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I'm sorry about that experience. That must have been extremely painful. And yet, I heard you saying that, or what I am extrapolating is that pivotal moment became a defining moment for you, where you then looked at the situation and said, how can I find the abundance in this? How can
Mhm.
I look at this situation from a place of power rather than lack and scarcity, which is huge. And
Right.
in order to be able to really do that, to develop that skill to look at anything in life from that lens, what you said earlier in the conversation is that we have to be able to learn how to go inward. And as long as we continue to look at the external situations in our life, the external people, and we're trying to get that validation that we matter, that we're okay from outside of ourselves, we're never going to have that true peace,
Mhm.
that true joy, that true freedom. So, and thus you talk about chasing that perfection, which is an irony because you can't ever have perfection, and we don't want to be chasing it anyway because it's out there. So instead we need to do a U-turn and go inward.
Mhm.
And let's stop there for a minute. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're spot on because it's what we feel internally, we try to mask, and our projection and a portrayal of how we show up is what we want the world to see because our inner world is chaos. It's a mess. It's ugly. It's bleak. It's shamed. It's guilt. It's loss. It's grief. It's a lot of ugliness that, to be honest, we don't parade that around in our world today. Because when we do, we're just, ooh, tuck that away. Nobody wants to see that. So you're just shamed again for feeling these certain ways. One of the things that I've recognized in my own journey is that when I'm true to myself, that there is nothing that anyone can say or do that I haven't already said or done to myself. So there's the infliction is already done on my behalf. And so we'll unpack that throughout the conversation about like how, because those are some of the tips and strategies that I want to leave your listeners with. But it's pretty cool because now you get to reclaim that power. But had I not had that pivotal moment in my life, things would have gone differently because we tend to be sleepwalkers, right? We just autopilot. We're just doing our things and we don't realize what impact and the gravity of our actions and our thoughts, our words and our beliefs are not only affecting us, but those that we encounter, and we wonder, why aren't I loved? Why am I being rejected? I just want to be accepted. I want to belong. I want to connect. I want all these things, right? But what are we doing internally to do that for ourselves? And so that was the basically like holding a mirror to myself. And I was like, ooh, yeah. If I want to be loved, am I loving myself? If I want to be
Yeah.
accepted, am I accepting myself? And the answer on all those questions I was asking myself was no. And that's where I had to do the work. That's where I began.
I love that. And so let's put a pause there and let's deconstruct that for a moment because you did talk earlier too in the beginning about how you mentioned about taking personal responsibility. And that is part of taking personal responsibility is to recognize that we can no longer point the finger and blame our
Mhm.
parents, our partner, our boss, our coworker, or whoever, or this one that, you know, victimized me when I was 8 or this. At this point in time, the only one who can change anything is ourselves.
Mhm.
We can't control people, places, and things.
Mhm.
We only have control over what we do. So if we are unhappy, if we have relationships that are not fulfilling, they're not meaningful, if we don't have the life that we desire, the only one who can make that change is us. And so to be able to take that personal responsibility and then to add in what you said is to start with us. Turn the mirror. If you think your spouse or husband is being mean, judgmental, critical, whatever, as you said, are you being that way with yourself? Are you criticizing yourself? What is your inner critic like? Are you
Mhm.
accepting yourself or are you constantly berating yourself? So being able to take personal responsibility is, in my opinion, and I think you would agree, is very key to transforming and shifting our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yes.
that was a big awakening because it's not to minimize or mitigate what was done to you.
Absolutely
What things
not.
happen when you're like 8 years old. There's nothing you
Yes.
can do, but you're a small child. But how long do we have to carry that around when we are grown adults that have the power
Yes.
to make choices and we can make a decision from that point on to choose something differently? And I had to unpack a lot of that stuff because that's what I was carrying around because I allowed that to be the limitations of my story. I allowed that to be part of my identity. And so when I'm aligning my identity with my beliefs and my stories, what happens? Every single action that I do is to align with that because that's the identity. So I had to, at that bottom is where I had to strip everything and say, well, who is Rachel today at this rock bottom? Not how she got here. Yes, that's important. We'll figure it out. But I'm not the same person that 20, 30 years ago that started to here because I have to be somebody different to climb out of this pit.
Yep. I
So
call
who
it
am I
a,
today?
I usually, for myself, I called it a deep, dark abyss
Yeah,
from
I
which I
just call
thought
it
I
a
would
shit
never.
pit.
I should, yeah.
It's messy, it's ugly,
Yeah.
and it stinks because we're carrying around so much
So
garbage.
much.
Yes.
Because we spent years of just pushing that shit down, right? It's like
Yeah.
sedimentation in a body of water. If you just put layer upon layer, you're not even going to be able to see the bottom. It's going to be dark and murky and muddy. The water is not free flowing. It's not clear because you just keep building upon it. And that's what we've done with our inner ecosystem is just keep pushing it down because as you said earlier, no one wants to hear about you being a hot mess. Put that shit away, hide it. We don't want to see that or talk about it. So we've been conditioned to show up with our best foot forward, right? You can just recall some of the things that parents said, at least in my generation and many others, I'm sure. Suck it up. Pull yourself up by the bootstrap. What are you crying about? I'll give you something to cry about. What do you mean you're upset? Like you have everything to be happy about.
Yeah.
All of those messages told us when we were kids that it wasn't okay to feel. It wasn't okay to just be a hot mess. And it wasn't okay to just have those big emotions. So that's when we learned to stuff it. And that doesn't serve us at all when we're trying to move forward in life. However, I will say two things. One is because you said not to stay stuck in our childhoods, and I totally agree, and not to blame the person who did blah, blah, blah. And even if you have someone in your life now today that is saying something critical or mean or hurtful, I'm not trying in any way, shape, or form to undermine that someone might be being an asshole to you. It could very well be. My point is what I'm trying to say is that how you respond and what you do with it is on you. It's your responsibility. And even if it's for me, I had to learn that when someone said something that stung and really hurt, that it was an opportunity for me to look at that wound that I had from childhood and say, okay, why is this hurting so much? Or why does this bother me? And it didn't. mean that I had to go back and relive my childhood. It just meant that here it was coming up to the surface from that sedimentation. It was coming to the surface so that I could heal it in the present moment, so that I didn't have to push it back down, because the universe will keep showing us over and over again until we do something about it, do something differently.
Mm.
And it doesn't even mean today, even. I call myself a recovering people pleaser, a recovering perfectionist, because my patterns will still come to the surface at times. And all that means is there's just an opportunity to go a little deeper and to level up even more and to be able to heal even more. So I don't look at it like, "Oh my god, what is wrong with you, Kim? Like, you've been dealing with this for decades. Just stop already." Now I'm like, "Oh, okay, there's a little bit more for me to learn. There's a little bit more for me to heal." And so, any thoughts on all of that? I just said a big mouthful.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying there because it's so true. It's like we get at the bottom of that pit, it's all covered with all kinds of layers. And the second we move, there's a ripple, right? So now we're stirring that stuff up and we're standing in this murky water, the muck, right? And that muck is like the stuff that we need to filter through
Right.
because we have to, right? So we're separating. We got the dirty, clear, into the clear waters up top because we can breathe above there.
Yep.
But that mess, every time we stir, it's bottled up. And it's like, how do we gently on ourselves? Because if we try to do any sort of a healing or something so rash, it's going to disrupt everything that we knew. So we have to move slowly. And that's part of when we look at the healing aspect of the journey to healing, fitness, and self love. The healing part of it is to take things slow, to be kind and gentle. And that's not somebody who chases, right? Chasing is very aggressive, it's forceful, it's we could just got it. We're very go. We don't slow. Slow is a whole different pace that I had to learn. But when you're stuck in this muck and at the bottom, time is all you got because you can't force yourself through growth and transformation. That's the journey. And then the journey is where we're finding moments of joy and happiness and love and patience and kindness and all the things that we intrinsically want, but they're all internally. So the story is really cool. How I unpack it and share the details and the intricacies and the lessons and the takeaways and so much that I had to go through, it shines light on those areas for our readers as well, because your story doesn't have to be a direct replica of mine. But if you're a human and have experienced loss, grief, setback, trauma, negative beliefs, negative self talk, any of that stuff, and even how we perceive ourselves and our identity, then you're a human and I'm a human. So let's connect. That's what it's about. It's just sharing stories. It's sharing the realness and the rawness.
I wanna back up there for a second and underline and highlight the part about slow, going slow. Because
Yes.
when I heard you say slow, it was almost like my body just wanted to just relax as well. Just like, and
Yes.
slow is, in my opinion, the antidote to the perfectionist, or
Mhm.
it may be even like the middle ground of that all or nothing, because a perfectionist is going to go 150 miles an hour, sprinting out of the gate, and then get overwhelmed, burned out, hit a wall, afraid to fail, and then can easily go into nothing,
Mhm.
zero, right? Just, okay, done with that, quit, give up. And what I heard you saying is that rather than that hustling or that pushing or that forcing, it's about just going slow and just taking it one day at a time and just allowing ourselves to unfold.
Yeah.
And that's that gray area. And that is where I find for myself, and I'm being 100% honest, that I can still fall into that pitfall of I have to go. Because, for example, I am in the middle of writing my first book right now. And since you're already an established author, you know what the process is like for writing a book. And I'm just finishing up with my editor on the editing piece of it. We did the cover design, we did the back, and it was such a grind. And it still is because now it's like, all right, now I have to gear up for the launch and gear up for this and this. And I have felt myself pushing like pedal to the metal for months. It started in January for months and months. And it's the first time, though, I will say this, I will say it's the first time that I didn't give up. There were so many times when it was getting so hard. And that's another thing for a perfectionist. When it does get to be too hard, too overwhelming,
Mhm.
just too much, that's the point at which a perfectionist will want to go into that nothing and quit, the black or white, all or nothing thinking. And I almost did what you were saying is just slowed everything down. And I just had this little voice in my head, which was my intuition, just saying, Kim, it's going to be all right. Just stay the course. Every time I ran into a wall or a block in the process of writing the book, I wanted to give up, but I didn't. I just stayed the course and just slowed down. And so now it's like almost done. So I want to say I have to give myself credit there, but what I started to say, not a but. And I just think I wanted to point out for the listeners that it can still be a challenge to fall into the old way of being. What we're really underlining here is this all or nothing thinking.
Yes. Everything I had done that led me to the bottom of the pit for chasing perfection, I found myself in a very similar situation years later after I've written this book. And I'm thinking, how could I, why am I here again? I'm just
Mm.
in a whole different chapter of it. And I had to take inventory of my life again and say, this is how I got to where I am at today. And I found myself actually taking pages out of my own book. I went back to my own book, read it twice, and was like, yeah, that's showing up in this season that I'm in my life. It's just colored differently, it's packaged differently. And so as I found myself at the bottom of a different pit, I wouldn't say it's as deep as the first one because I've learned a lot, but the rebound and the resiliency to come out of that pit was shorter than it did the first time because with the same tools, the strategies, and the tips that I had to bring in that got me out of this pit are just as applicable today as they were however many years ago when I needed them. So to your point is like, how do we, with this all or nothing, it's easy for us to go to these extremes. And when things aren't working out, we become overwhelmed, as you said, burned out, stressed out. And I found myself at a season not too long ago where I had just hit burnout again, but I didn't even know what burnout was because I didn't experience it the first time as the way I did this time. I didn't have the same knowledge as I do today. So that burnout is just, it's a whole nother recovery process. So all or nothing will just lead you to one extreme to the other. So you're constantly swinging this pendulum, but yeah, at the same time, in your mind, you're just thinking, okay, no, stay in the middle ground, stay in the middle, stay in the middle. So it's so hard to tame two animals at the same time when you're trying to live in the focus of this middle ground, this balance of moderation, this gray area, this take it slow, because we know that we can never sustain something in forever. There's going to be seasons that are going to swing the pendulum this way, and then if we address those correctly, we'll just gently correct course to the middle. And then just swing this pendulum to the other side and the other. But as a perfectionist, what I found is all or nothing is that we're constantly ding, ding, right? We're just knocking the ball off the wall. There is no time to actually be in the center. And in the center is the greatest part of where you can be. And what I found is it's when we look at it from like a mindset perspective too, it's also being in the present. So the present moment. So I want to tie this into some of the mental and the emotional components, but also how they impact and affect people pleasers and perfectionists. When we're focused too much on our past, that's where the fear and anxiety is. That's as a perfectionist, we're very driven by the past because we want to get out of there as quickly as possible. So we shoot for the future version. That future version is giving us anxiety as well, right? Because the future hasn't yet happened. So we just know fear, run from fear because that past sucks and we got to get out of there as quickly as possible. Future hasn't happened. We're experiencing anxiety, depression, overwhelm, overstimulation, all this stuff. But what happens here and now? The here and now is the present moment. In the present, when we can focus on today, as you said, step by step, day by day, little by little, all these little cliches and affirmations and mantras, they help root us in the present here and now. Because when we're in the present, we don't think about the past or the future. It hasn't happened yet. One did, one hasn't. So what can we do today if we're looking at perfectionists because we want control? What can we do today to reclaim that control, reclaim that power? And that is to give 100% focus to the present moment because that's where the progress will be made. And we don't have to worry about the extremes because the extremes are right here. That they're in the present. So I hope that brings us some clarity
Yeah.
to what we're actually doing internally and messing with our mental and emotional state because we cannot sustain pendulum swinging forever. And we can't sustain pleasing people because they're just like the wind too. They're constantly changing. You're like, wait a minute, I thought you liked this. Now you don't. So now I got to go back to my drawing board and try harder and remember to you that you like cows instead of pigs. And now I got to do this for your gift, right? So it's like this constant bandwidth of always trying to keep up with who and what you have to accommodate. But what about the one person you have to accommodate and attend to their needs and their wants and their desires? And that is you here, today, now.
I love that. I think the biggest thing that I'm taking away from this conversation is, and I hope that the listeners are too, what I heard from you a lot is just this place of giving permission, right?
Mhm.
Just permission for so many things. Permission to just be, permission to be imperfect, permission to be messy, permission to not having to figure it all out. And then more tactically, as you just rounded out, just this place of the place where we want to do our work is in the present moment,
Mhm.
is in the
Mhm.
present moment. So there's so much clarity on that. We touched upon just naturally and organically through the conversation, ways for the perfectionist to deal with that all or nothing thinking and how to just not chase the perfection. Is there anything left that you want to share with listeners in terms of tools or tips that we haven't
Yes.
hit upon?
Yes. I want to go back for a moment about being in the power of the presence. Because in the power of the presence is what we're actually shooting for as a perfectionist, right? So if we could achieve those things, then we could find what? We both said it at the beginning. We just wanted to find peace. We wanted to find this rest, right? So all of that is in there. That's the gift of being present because in the present is just peace because we've done what we can today. We've done what we can do now. But
Mhm.
two things that I want to leave your listeners with that we hadn't talked about, and I think is really important. And again, some of these things sound a little bit cheesy and cliche, but once you start applying them and and bringing them into part of your everyday routine or your self care or your affirmations, your mantras, whatever that self talk is, but 2 things, and that is letting go and surrender. When I was writing my book, all I kept hearing about was just let it go, and I couldn't hear, like, more than twice without that Frozen song popping up, and I was just like, "Okay, that becomes my anthem mentally," even though it's super annoying, but I'm like, "But what's more annoying? Holding on to something so heavy that I have 0 control over, and I'm carting this around like a backpack that's filled with so much weight that is unbearable that I have to let that go." For me to continue my journey, I can't keep picking up pieces of my life and adding them to this overpacked backpack as I'm trying to climb myself out of this mountain or out of this pit. So I have to just drop the backpack. I have to let that go. And as I'm metaphorically letting this go, I find myself just easing into the surrender of what is. What is? It's just one foot in front of the other, one step, one day, one thought, one word, one action. Everything became one, very monotone. Because somebody who's chasing, we want everything, but we can't handle it all. We can't manage it all. And that only adds to our overstacked, overtoppled plates. That is the overwhelm. And so, what is more manageable and what is more sustainable? Yes, the slow pace, sometimes for somebody who goes fast, is a little bit boring. And we need some of that excitement. But yet we know we have to pull back on the throttle there because we can't go fast for so long. And this is where I'm finding myself in just seasons. There's seasons to go fast, there's seasons to go slow. There's seasons to just embrace and just slow down and bring it all in. But then there's times we just got to sprint. So there's different seasons. And I take that into a calendar year and I try to break this up into quarters. So quarter one is come off the holiday. So it's very slow. It's winter. Things are dormant. Q2 is more about picking up the pace because we want to prepare so we can enjoy our summers. And then we'll repeat the process on Q4 where it's okay to go hard because it's seasons, it's holidays, and it depends on what kind of business you're in too. But there's seasons for everything. And when you could take again that inventory, take that bird's eye view, we can now say, oh, okay, this is a season for rest and slowing down because I have to reclaim my strength and I have to reclaim that endurance because I know there's a season where I have to sprint fast and hard, but there'll be a season of rest after that. And so these are just strategies that have been working for me more on the second go around than the first time.
And that's the key. That's the purpose of it all is each time you go around, you pick up a little bit more and you can do it a little bit better.
Mhm.
So, Rachel, thank you so much truly for this conversation. I know that this is going to bring so much value to the listeners. It has given me so much value already, and I've taken away so many jewels. So, thank you so much for being such a great guest.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And if anyone is interested in getting a copy of my book, Chasing Perfection, A Journey to Healing, Fitness, and Self Love, you can find that everywhere books are sold online. And if you request in your bookstore, it'll be there as well. And also give me a follow on all my social media is I am Rachel Brooks, and my website is IamRachelBrooks.com. So I hope this episode resonates and I'd love to connect with you guys. So thank you.
Okay, guys, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. I absolutely loved having a conversation with Rachel Brooks. And I can say for myself, just as she was talking and sharing, that I found myself just being able to relax and let my body just soften as she was talking about some of the antidotes or tips or tools that a perfectionist can use. And what I took away more than anything else is just being able to have this permission to just be and not having to be in this all or nothing perfectionistic way of thinking and to just try to find more of the middle ground. So, if you enjoyed this content, I would love for you to leave a review. Could subscribe or even leave us a comment. In addition, I have a quiz that you can take on my website, kimgrosscoaching.com. If you are wondering whether or not you have perfectionistic tendencies or even people pleasing tendencies, because we did talk about the people pleaser as well.